Nancy Guthrie remains unaccounted for. But this morning, the FBI forensic team secured a specific coordinate deep inside the national forest. Everything we thought we knew about this investigation has just been inverted. What happens when the only crime scene investigators manage to locate is actually a psychological trap designed by a predator? Welcome back to Tracking Evil with John, where we dissect the forensic realities of active cases. If you want to follow the evidence as it unfolds, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. The field office issued a press release confirming the discovery of a dump site. Law enforcement agencies spent the last 2 weeks analyzing grid searches and digital footprints. The initial assumption centered on a standard abduction scenario or an interpersonal conflict escalating into violence. This new coordinate shifts the forensic parameters entirely. A dump site implies a calculated disposal protocol. It indicates an offender operating with a geographical strategy and a clear operational timeline. We are looking at a highly organized pattern of behavior rather than a spontaneous crime of passion. The coordination required to transport material to a secondary remote days requires planning and environmental awareness. Investigators are currently processing the soil and surrounding vegetation for trace evidence. The perimeter is locked down to prevent contamination of any potential biological markers. Evidence recovery teams utilize grid search methodology to catalog every disturbed layer of topsoil. They document the decomposition rate of flora beneath the displaced earth to establish a precise time of burial. This is a critical juncture in the forensic timeline. The physical data recovered here will either close the net around a primary suspect or force behavioral analysts to draft an entirely new profile. The meticulous nature of this specific crime scene suggests the latter scenario is highly probable. Forensic teams understand that organized offenders often use distance to their advantage. Every mile between the initial abduction point and the disposal site exponentially increases the difficulty of evidence recovery. The FBI evidence response team is operating under the assumption that the perpetrator spent significant time at this secondary location. Profilers look at dump sites to understand the psychological comfort zone of the suspect. Choosing a national forest indicates a familiarity with the terrain and a confidence in avoiding random detection by civilians. This geographic profiling data becomes the baseline for narrowing down the suspect pool. The presence of federal agents indicates local jurisdictions recognize the complexity of the disposal site immediately. We must examine the initial data points to understand the magnitude of this recent discovery. 34-year-old Nancy Guthrie vanished following her night shift. Security footage confirms she swiped her access card and exited her office building alone at 10:15 in the evening on day 1. By 6 in the morning on day 2, her vehicle was located abandoned on the shoulder of Route 9. The location was precisely 5 miles from her residence. The keys remained in the ignition. First responders documented zero signs of a physical struggle or forced entry within the vehicle cabin. The steering wheel and interior door handles yielded no foreign biological matter. The physical evidence presented a complete void. There were no tire tracks indicating a secondary vehicle had forced her off the road. The placement of the car appeared highly deliberate. The position of the driver's seat remained adjusted to her height. There was no disruption to the interior cabin to suggest a hasty departure. 2 days after the vehicle discovery, her former boyfriend Marcus Thorne departed the state. Local network broadcasts identified him as an alleged person of interest in the ongoing investigation. He has not been formally charged with any crime. The geographic displacement between her workplace, the abandoned vehicle, and Thorne leaving the jurisdiction created a fragmented timeline. Investigators attempted to correlate cell tower pings with highway toll records to establish a vector of movement. The lack of a confirmed primary crime scene severely hindered their progress. Without knowing where the initial contact occurred, behavioral analysts could not determine the methodology of the abduction. Search and rescue teams operated with severe data deficits for 14 consecutive days. They relied on probability models based on historical missing persons data. The timeline remained entirely static until the sudden confirmation of the southern forest perimeter. 14 days of procedural dead ends terminated when those coordinates were verified by the field office. But that forest clearing is not a resolution to the static timeline. It is the entrance to a forensic labyrinth. The physical characteristics of the southern forest location demand rigorous forensic scrutiny. Agents discovered an area of intentionally disturbed topsoil measuring approximately 4 feet in diameter. The excavation yielded specific personal effects belonging to the victim. Technicians cataloged a leather handbag containing identification cards alongside a single footwear item. These physical artifacts initially suggested a localized disposal event. However, the Digital Forensics Division provided contrasting telemetry data from the mobile device of the victim. The service provider confirmed the phone was manually powered down at 11:40 in the evening on day 1. The final geographic ping registered 20 miles north of the established perimeter. The physical dump site is located deep within the southern sector. This spatial contradiction presents a significant logistical anomaly. A panicked individual operating under severe duress does not orchestrate a 20-mile geographic divergence between their electronic footprint and their physical belongings. Criminal behavioral analysis dictates that such separation requires deliberate compartmentalization. It indicates a perpetrator attempting to manipulate the search radius through technological misdirection. Investigators must reconstruct the precise sequence of events bridging the northern ping and the southern excavation. The presence of the handbag and identification cards provides a physical anchor point, yet the isolated placement of a single shoe introduces a secondary layer of complexity. The soil surrounding these items displayed uniform disruption, consistent with deliberate burial. The deposition of these items was not the result of a hasty discarding process. The perpetrator allocated specific time resources to enter the belongings. This calculated behavior starkly contrasts with the chaotic nature of typical abduction scenarios. Agents cataloging the grid search noted the complete absence of drag marks or broken foliage adjacent to the disturbed earth. The scene lacked the characteristic environmental disruption associated with the transport of a heavy mass. The comprehensive excavation of the southern coordinate yielded a profound forensic deficit. The primary object of the search was entirely absent from the location. Forensic anthropologists confirmed that no human remains were deposited within the disturbed soil matrix. Furthermore, the laboratory technicians isolating biological samples reported an absolute zero baseline for foreign cellular material. There was no extraneous blood spatter or epithelial cells located on the recovered handbag or identification cards. The perpetrator managed to handle the items, transport them to a remote location, and bury them without leaving a microscopic signature. This revelation alters the fundamental classification of the southern forest coordinate. It is not a disposal site, but a highly sophisticated decoy environment designed to consume investigative resources. The orchestrated nature of this misdirection requires a reassessment of the geographic timeline. We must consider the mechanism utilized to generate the northern cell tower ping. The deliberate manipulation of the device suggests the perpetrator understood law enforcement tracking protocols. A prevalent theory among behavioral analysts involves exploiting commercial transit routes. It is highly probable the offender deposited the active device onto a northbound cargo vehicle traveling along the interstate corridor. This tactic effectively weaponizes the digital tracking infrastructure against the investigators. It creates a secondary phantom timeline while the actual perpetrator operates within a completely separate geographic zone. If you are analyzing these advanced forensic countermeasures alongside our team, make sure you are subscribed to Tracking Evil with John for the duration of this investigation. The level of forensic countermeasures deployed here elevates the profile of the unknown subject. We are observing an offender who anticipates law enforcement methodology and actively engineers blind spots. The southern decoy site successfully occupied federal and local agencies for a critical duration, but as the lead investigator processed the inventory from the buried handbag, a specific discrepancy emerged. The inventory log documented the presence of financial cards and standard cosmetics. It failed to account for one highly specific item known to be in the continuous possession of the victim. The absence of this particular object transforms a complex missing persons investigation into an unprecedented behavioral puzzle. The inventory of the recovered handbag revealed a glaring forensic omission that investigators almost failed to categorize during the initial site processing. Evidence technicians operating within the secure perimeter utilized standardized cataloging procedures for every item extracted from the disturbed topsoil. They documented the presence of a leather wallet containing her identification, several intact credit cards, and a significant amount of physical currency. This immediate data point conclusively eliminates robbery or financial opportunism as a primary motive for the abduction. The perpetrator actively chose to leave highly valuable financial instruments buried in the damp soil. They were not seeking monetary gain through this interaction. However, a comprehensive cross-reference between the physical inventory and the victimology reports highlighted two highly specific missing objects. According to a former criminal profiler interviewed by local television networks, Nancy Guthrie consistently wore a distinct family heirloom engagement ring. This specific piece of jewelry is entirely absent from the recovered personal effects. Furthermore, the systematic grid search of the Southern Forest coordinate yielded exactly one item of footwear belonging to the victim. The companion shoe is missing from both the abandoned vehicle and the meticulously constructed decoy site. The selective retention of these specific items signifies a profound shift in the behavioral profile of the unknown subject. A predatory offender motivated by financial gain takes cash and immediately discards identifying materials. A disorganized offender operating under extreme panic leaves everything at the primary scene without attempting concealment. The deliberate extraction of a personal ring and a single shoe indicates the systematic collection of psychological artifacts. This specific behavior is forensically categorized as trophy taking within the behavioral analysis unit. It allows the offender to retain a physical manifestation of their crime for psychological reliving long after the event concludes. The perpetrator navigated a high-stress environment and consciously decided to remove two distinct personal items before burying the remaining evidence to actively confuse search teams. This sequence of actions requires a terrifying degree of operational clarity and emotional detachment. Retaining an engagement ring necessitates close physical interaction with the victim, potentially post-mortem, which indicates a high psychological comfort level with violence. A small metallic object possesses minimal financial value compared to the discarded credit cards, but the psychological value to the offender operating this matrix is immeasurable. The deliberate absence of this specific item dictates the true operational nature of the unidentified subject. Investigators must now evaluate the existing suspect pool against this highly organized and predatory behavioral signature. The primary focus of the initial local investigation heavily centered on her former romantic partner, Marcus Thorne. He remains the alleged person of interest in this active and escalating case. Thorne departed the state jurisdiction exactly 48 hours after law enforcement discovered the abandoned vehicle parked on Route 9. Statistical data models generated by federal agencies frequently point to former romantic partners in cases of sudden female disappearance. Interpersonal conflict provides a universally recognized and statistically dominant motive for domestic violence. However, applying the forensic reality of the Southern decoy site to the profile of Thorne creates a severe investigative contradiction. The individual who constructed the forest burial site possessed advanced knowledge of trace evidence avoidance and forensic countermeasures. They executed a perfectly sterile operation resulting in zero biological transfer onto the buried materials. They also managed the complex logistical maneuver of transporting the active cellular device 20 miles north to generate a false geographic ping. Investigators must critically determine if Marcus Thorne possesses the specific operational background to execute these sophisticated electronic and physical countermeasures. Crimes of passion involving former domestic partners are statistically chaotic and highly disorganized events. They consistently generate massive amounts of forensic transfer due to the close physical proximity and the high emotional volatility of the violent interaction. The Southern decoy site presents the exact opposite behavioral parameters. It is a sterile, calculated, and highly controlled environment devoid of spontaneous emotion. If the alleged person of interest is truly responsible, he successfully suppressed severe psychological panic and executed a flawless counter-surveillance strategy immediately following a violent confrontation. This specific dichotomy represents the central complication currently paralyzing the Federal Investigative Task Force. Behavioral analysts struggle to logically reconcile the statistically common motive of a relationship dispute with the chillingly methodical execution observed at the decoy site. The timeline required to drive north to manipulate the cellular network and then travel south to orchestrate the burial site requires hours of unimpeded movement. Law enforcement must trace the exact location data for Thorne during this critical post-abduction window. The physical evidence strongly suggests an offender who operates completely without emotional interference or typical post-crime paranoia. Investigators are beginning to realize the violent former boyfriend hypothesis does not neatly align with the cold calculation of the physical evidence. We are tracking a suspect profile that is significantly darker and vastly more experienced in criminal evasion. This level of forensic manipulation requires our audience to analyze these contradictions closely, so drop your behavioral theories regarding the suspect profile in the comments section below. We are dealing with an offender who views this entire federal investigation as a calculated tactical exercise rather than an active manhunt. The forensic implications of the missing personal effects require extensive behavioral analysis to properly contextualize. Investigators must systematically categorize the psychological weight of the absent items to understand the offender. The specific extraction of the reported heirloom engagement ring signifies a calculated post-offense objective. This deliberate action completely contradicts the chaotic behavioral patterns associated with spontaneous crimes of passion. The perpetrator navigated a highly stressful environment and executed a premeditated selection of physical objects. Behavioral analysts within the federal task force classify this specific operational signature as trophy taking. A psychological trophy represents a tangible manifestation of total dominance over the targeted victim. It allows the predatory offender to psychologically relive the violent encounter long after the physical event. This retention of personal artifacts serves a highly specific and necessary function for the subject. Forensic psychology distinguishes strictly between the taking of souvenirs and the systematic collection of trophies. A disorganized offender might retain a souvenir to remember a significant personal interaction or conflict. An organized predator collects a trophy as a symbol of ultimate conquest and absolute physical control. The engagement ring possesses immense psychological value for an offender motivated by power and dominance. Removing a symbol of personal commitment from the victim represents the ultimate psychological violation. The deliberate extraction of the single footwear item further reinforces this specific organized behavioral profile. A disorganized individual abandons evidence randomly without considering the forensic or psychological consequences of the items. The systematic removal of exactly one shoe is a documented behavioral quirk in specific predatory typologies. It indicates an offender who operates with a rigid internal logic and a specific collection methodology. We must critically evaluate the terrifying implications of this highly organized and experienced offender profile. The perpetrator possessed the logistical capability to manage a complex decoy operation without forensic contamination. They retain the selected psychological trophies while simultaneously misdirecting massive federal law enforcement resources. This specific sequence of actions requires an offender operating without the paralyzing panic typical of amateurs. This chilling realization introduces a profound operational variable into the active and ongoing federal investigation. If the unidentified subject is an organized predator motivated by psychological conquest, this is not isolated. Serial offenders rely upon collected trophies to sustain their psychological requirements during the cooling off period. The meticulously sterile nature of the southern decoy site strongly corroborates the hypothesis of prior criminal experience. The offender clearly understood advanced law enforcement search protocols and trace evidence recovery methodologies. They successfully engineered a physical scenario that entirely wasted 14 days of critical investigative momentum. The local jurisdiction initially focused its primary surveillance resources on the alleged person of interest. However, the sophisticated counter-surveillance tactics observed at the decoy site necessitate a drastically broadened perspective. Do you believe the individual currently possessing the engagement ring is a former partner clinging to a memory or an organized predator cataloging a conquest? Drop your psychological assessments in the comments section below so we can analyze the behavioral data together. The federal task force must now confront the stark reality of hunting a highly sophisticated adversary. The southern decoy site was not merely a desperate attempt to conceal physical trace evidence, it functioned as a deliberate and highly calculated psychological taunt directed at the investigating federal agencies. The offender orchestrated a complex forensic puzzle and successfully monitored the subsequent law enforcement response. This extraordinary level of manipulation indicates a subject possessing a highly dominant and narcissistic psychological structure. They derive profound satisfaction from actively outsmarting federal authorities and controlling the entire investigative narrative. The missing ring and the missing shoe represent the only authentic links to this predator. The federal investigation currently operates within a state of severe procedural and geographical deadlock. The sophisticated misdirection of the southern decoy site provided crucial behavioral data but zero geographical intelligence. Investigators must entirely abandon the physical parameters of the southern forest perimeter immediately. The primary investigative focus must now revert exclusively to the anomalous digital telemetry recorded on day one. Agents are actively attempting to reconstruct the precise trajectory of the final cellular network transmission. The mobile device powered down exactly at 11:40 in the evening, 20 miles north. Law enforcement must exhaustively analyze the northern interstate corridor to identify potential transit vectors. This monumental task requires the comprehensive review of commercial toll records and automated license plate readers. Obtaining the necessary legal authorization to access historical cell site location information requires significant procedural time. Telecommunication corporations require highly specific federal warrants before releasing the encrypted transit data to investigators. The task force must isolate thousands of commercial cargo vehicles traversing that specific route during the window. They are searching for a digital anomaly within an expanding haystack of interstate transit data. The process of cellular triangulation along a high-speed transit corridor presents significant technical and logistical challenges. A device moving at highway speeds connects with multiple cellular towers in rapid succession. This rapid network handover process degrades the overall precision of the location data available to the federal analysts. The local investigative branch continues to monitor the limited activities of the alleged person of interest. Marcus Thorne has reportedly secured comprehensive legal representation and officially ceased all communication with authorities. The complete absence of physical trace evidence linking him to the decoy site precludes any formal charges. Obtaining a search warrant for his current residence requires establishing a definitive physical link to the crime. The sterile nature of the decoy site effectively insulates him from immediate legal jeopardy based on physical evidence. Circumstantial data regarding previous relationship conflicts is insufficient to compel a judicial search authorization. The investigation is simultaneously battling significant operational interference from external media networks and independent commentators. Local press outlets continually broadcast conflicting theories and unverified speculation regarding the potential suspect pool. This relentless informational noise severely complicates the operational security of the primary federal task force. Agents must constantly allocate resources to differentiate between authentic citizen reports and fabricated data. The stakes of this ongoing missing persons investigation remain critically high due to the established profile. The Behavioral Analysis Unit confirms that organized predators operating with physical trophies function on escalating cycles. The retention of the physical artifacts indicates an ongoing psychological connection to the initial violent interaction. The primary operational concern is the inevitable psychological degradation of that specific physical trophy over time. When the trophy loses its psychological efficacy, the organized predator will inevitably seek out a new target. The federal task force is essentially racing against the internal psychological clock of an unidentified subject. Every passing hour statistically increases the probability of a secondary offense occurring within the geographic region. This complex case remains entirely unresolved, and the immediate threat to public safety is definitively active. The most critical piece of physical evidence is currently in the possession of an organized offender. That missing engagement ring dictates the entire trajectory and ultimate resolution of this ongoing federal investigation. Wherever that specific piece of jewelry currently resides, the definitive truth regarding Nancy Guthrie is located there. Or even more chillingly, it currently sits on a display shelf curated by a predator who remains completely undetected. Analyzing the psychological architecture of a decoy scene provides crucial insight into predatory counter-surveillance strategies. What this investigation teaches us about forensic countermeasures is the terrifying evolutionary leap in offender sophistication. Traditional crime scene processing relies on the fundamental principle of low cards exchange. This doctrine dictates that every physical contact leaves a measurable trace. Organized predators understand this foundational vulnerability and actively construct environments specifically designed to exploit law enforcement protocols. The Southern Forest Coordinate represents a textbook application of spatial misdirection and forensic sterilization. The perpetrator weaponized the geographical vastness of the national forest to drain critical operational resources during the initial search phase. They anticipated the grid search methodology and deliberately seeded the area with identifying artifacts to guarantee detection. Simultaneously, they ensured the complete absence of biological material to prevent any subsequent laboratory matching. This level of behavioral control requires an individual who intimately understands modern criminalistics. Citizens must recognize that predatory individuals no longer rely solely on physical isolation to conceal their activities. They manipulate cellular telemetry and exploit commercial transit corridors to create digital alibis. The manipulation of the device generating the northern ping demonstrates a profound understanding of modern surveillance infrastructure. This case illustrates the critical necessity for law enforcement to integrate advanced digital forensics simultaneously with physical recovery operations. Relying exclusively on terrestrial searches when an offender deploys electronic misdirection guarantees severe procedural delays. The preservation of electronic data must match the urgency of securing a physical perimeter. A delayed warrant for cell site location information allows an organized predator to establish an insurmountable geographic advantage. Communities must understand that organized offenders thrive within this specific informational delay. The tactical advantage always belongs to the individual dictating the initial parameters of the investigation. Recognizing these sophisticated behavioral patterns allows authorities to anticipate secondary strikes before the offender completes their internal cycle. The immediate identification of a decoy site is paramount to maintaining the integrity of the active manhunt. This psychological arms race between predators and forensic science defines the modern criminal landscape. We return to the fundamental question that currently paralyzes the federal task force. What happens when the only physical evidence investigators possess was intentionally gifted to them by a killer? The active hunt for the individual responsible for the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie remains entirely unresolved. The geographic parameters of the search are expanding across the northern interstate while the Southern Forest Coordinate is officially abandoned. Law enforcement agencies are operating under maximum operational pressure to locate the missing engagement ring before the offender selects another target. The physical reality of this investigation changes by the hour as new digital telemetry is processed and analyzed. We will continue to cover every single forensic development and psychological profile update regarding this active manhunt. To ensure you receive immediate notifications when the federal task force announces their next major breakthrough, subscribe to Tracking Evil with John right now. We analyze the evidence when the conventional narrative fails to provide the objective truth. Will the digital footprint along the northern highway finally expose the predator? Or will the missing trophy remain the only authentic piece of this terrifying puzzle? We will be here to dissect the forensic realities the moment law enforcement finally locates that missing ring. Until that specific piece of jewelry is secured within an evidence locker, the countdown clock for the federal task force cannot be paused. We will see you all in the next critical update.